For everyone who's sick of modern Hollywood, there's now a new alternative, The Daily Wire. They've been making waves with films like Lady Ballers and What Is a Woman, but the reaction from the other side has been predictably aggressive. When What Is a Woman was released, The Daily Wire claimed they got hit with a DDoS attack on opening night. Further screenings were met with as many protesters as fans, but a release on Twitter saw it hit 177 million views in its first week. Adding to the culture war is one thing, but does The Daily Wire have what it takes to take on Hollywood itself? Well, we've made a bunch of videos in the past about how stale movies are right now. From the incessant pushing of the same tired doctrine to the unoriginal and bad ideas, Hollywood has been in the gutter. And Netflix hasn't been much better, releasing the same movies over and over again, or drawing out shows until they inevitably cancel them on a cliffhanger. It's like they know that most people watching are just on their phones anyway, but where there's stagnation, there's also opportunity. And so it's no secret that everyone's been pretty sick of nearly everything that Hollywood has been putting out over the past few years. Audiences just aren't tolerating the same films being released over and over again, and it's most visible in their rare successes. Barbenheimer was great for Hollywood, and the cultural impact of this event was a huge boost for cinemas as well as film in general. But despite how good this might have been, it wasn't the only reason behind their success. Instead, they were basically the only truly original movies around at the time. For every Oppenheimer or Barbie movie, there were 20 Indiana Jones remakes or Lightyears. You would think that losing hundreds of millions of dollars each time would be enough motivation to give it a rest, but if upcoming movies like the Snow White remake tell us anything, is that Hollywood studios are doomed for failure. But it isn't just their unoriginality that's led to their demise though. Inserting ham-fisted, progressive, left-wing rhetoric to try and appeal to an imaginary audience alienates a huge chunk of the audience already. And so it's unclear why studios are so obsessed with this. Maybe it's to pander to an audience of people that only exist in the minds of studio executives. Maybe it's ESG scores. But in the end, no matter what, there's not nearly enough idiots who'll watch anything that's marketed as diverse or challenges your perceptions. People don't care about this, at least not enough to keep Hollywood's bottom line afloat. It could also be a reflection of Hollywood's politics as well. The same as Silicon Valley and most of California, a manufactured ideological campaign to push their own views on the general public. But if that's the case, then it's been incredibly blunt and ineffective, and not to mention hollow. If anything, it's only hardened people against whatever they're trying to push.
We should take a special look at California because this is the woke utopia going down the toilet.
But in the end, people don't really have any good alternatives in movies anymore, at least alternatives that are well known and visible to the average audience member. Netflix could have stepped in to give people everything that Hollywood has been lacking, but the reality of it has been less than perfect. Sometimes Netflix greenlights and produces excellent movies and shows, all the way from independent films to mid and high budget blockbusters. All Quiet on the Western Front is a great example, an amazing movie that wouldn't have found a home with the big studios. And so Netflix stepped in to distribute it, and it got the recognition it deserves. Other films they've had a large part in making, like Don't Look Up or Marriage Story, have shown promise as well. But with these few gems comes truckloads of unoriginal garbage movies that are clearly meant to just fill out their catalogue. On top of that, their treatment of writers and actors is really less than stellar. Streaming revenue is massive, but the people who are actually behind the movies rarely see more than a crumb or two, keeping their ratings and their stats opaque whilst underpaying production crews has become their modus operandi. All of this stagnation and unoriginality has left audiences wanting. When you look back at the history of cinema and the thousands of amazing movies, it leaves you envious of what Hollywood used to be. And this is the gap in the market that the Daily Wire has decided to exploit, and whether it's going to work is a whole other matter. You see, they're really only just getting started here, but of the films we've seen so far, they have shown some promise. One of their first films was Shut In, a horror thriller that wasn't terrible but wasn't really amazing either. The film did have some standout moments. Vincent Gallo actually gives an amazing performance, and the tension that film creates is good. For a completely new studio, it's a remarkably well-polished film. Obviously, there's still problems though. The other actors in the film don't leave much to be desired, and the themes are a little bit on the nose. Outside of the film itself, it's obviously an answer to the inserted bias we've seen in Hollywood, but it's also clearly not meant to just bait conservatives into watching it. The adult themes and the gritty scenes are far from what you'd expect right-wing soccer mums to want to see, which is a huge point in the movie's favour. Even this early on in their existence, the Daily Wire isn't solely relying on being the right-wing Hollywood to get an audience. But the problem with big studios inserting their own bias into films isn't that it's left-wing. It doesn't really matter what the rhetoric is, it's what it does to the films that has an impact, and if it's ever needed at all. Usually, it's never needed, and the criticism for it being there will still be there whatever side of the divide they're pushing. It's out of place and it smothers the creativity of a film, so it's worth criticizing, especially when it's for kids' films, as people and families just don't want to see it, and it's something that Disney is beginning to now realize, although they're still dealing with it in an inevitably slimy way. Take for example the new Snow White movie, where Disney had to do a complete U-turn on everything they said about the original movie. A large part of the original backlash can be traced to the Snow White actor's previous interviews, where she showed her true feelings for the film.
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
The interviews were a bright red neon sign telling everyone that the film was barely going to follow the actual fairy tale at all. More than that, it was yet another case of Disney forcing politics into a timeless tale and warping it beyond any semblance of the original. Along with the interview came the announcement that Snow White wouldn't meet any dwarfs, but instead would be accompanied by 7 multi-ethnic magical companions. It was the peak of hypocrisy, even if you buy into their identity politics. Switching out one minority group for a much more trendy minority group tells you all you need to know about the cynical motives behind the decision. When that was met with backlash, Disney then reversed it, and now the film will have 7 poorly CGI dwarfs instead. And the damage control continued when a new interview with Rachel Zegler on the film saw her completely reverse her previous comments. The no-nonsense "it's not the 1930s anymore" progressive Rachel was gone, and in her place, the new interview shows a dolled up and meek Rachel eager to placate fans by talking about how faithful the film would be to the original.
Definitely pressure. The cartoon's so beloved. It's like a monumental moment in film history.
Yeah.
It was like the first feature-length cartoon movie.
But it would be too little too late, even if it was their real opinions and thoughts, as we saw what Zegler and Modern Disney really think about the classics. They're just fodder for the money machine, a vehicle they can use to trot out the same fake political takes that they've been selling for years. The new Snow White was set to go even further, practically denouncing the classic version as everything that's wrong with society. And the new interview is clear in its intent to try and smooth things over, but like pretty much every apology video, it just doesn't really work. The damage was done. And so it's no coincidence that the Daily Wire has chosen to adapt Snow White as one of their upcoming major movies. The film will be called Snow White and the Evil Queen, focus more on the old brothers Grimm fairy tale and the traditional story rather than anything out of the ordinary. They haven't released many details so far, but from what they said it seems like they're going in the right direction. Despite Snow White being played by Brett Cooper, a conservative commentator, there isn't really any other signs that the film's going to be very political at all, but the overall intention is clear. The film is releasing as the first feature film in the Daily Wire's new kid-focused brand, Bentke. You can imagine that the Daily Wire are hoping that conservative parents angry at Disney's politics will turn to them instead for their kids' entertainment. If the content isn't just focused on promoting the other side of politics, they've got a good chance. There is a risk though that the new studio will just end up retreading the same steps that Disney took nearly a century ago. It's nearly certain that their version of Snow White will be better than the modern Disney version, but it might be a hard sell for the Daily Wire to convince people that their version of Snow White is better than the classic from the 30s. Outside of their kids' programming though, the Daily Wire has been making new movies and trying new ideas with some promising success. Lady Ballers is the Daily Wire's most successful movie so far. Based on a group of men pretending to be trans and competing in women's sports, it seems completely opaque in its intentions, with the trailer calling it the most triggering comedy of the year. It does deliver on that level, but a large part of the humor revolves around that same core joke. It's not flawless by any means, but for a film with a shoestring budget and minimal production time, it does do the job it's set out to do. It plays off a lot of different tropes from comedy sport movies, mostly made in the 2000s. The acting obviously isn't incredible either, but when most of the stars of the film are political commentators, it's to be expected. The nature of the film meant they weren't able to convince any Hollywood actors to break the groupthink and play a role. Now if you take the Rotten Tomatoes reviews, then it's a smash hit with a 91% approval rating, but because the movie is so enmeshed with the political issue it's making fun of, it's hard to really say whether the reviews are based on the movie itself or the message. Not that the movie makes any actual case for the conservative point of view. The world it takes place in is so surreal and the film is so tongue-in-cheek that it's more absurd than offensive really. But it's pretty unlikely that this is going to change anyone's minds on the topic. It's a right-wing movie made by conservative pundits for their specific audience. If anything, the movie makes less of a statement than the FBI did when they arrested one of the actors straight after the premiere. Not based on the film, according to them at least. Instead it was because of misdemeanors from January 6th that they just happened to chase up 3 years after. Although it's refreshing to watch a comedy that isn't going to pull any punches on what it does with its premise, there isn't anything else new about Lady Ballers. It's a one-sided take in a world of one-sided takes. It's fine for the Daily Wire to do it in a movie that's specifically designed as a vehicle for that message. You might hope that they'll branch out over time, but it's not an issue this early on. Unlike Hollywood, the intention isn't to slip the political bias past the viewers and package it with the things they already like. And the fact that the Daily Wire's take on Snow White and Lady Ballers are seen as subversive is a sign that the pendulum might be about to swing back the other way. Films like this were common just 20 years ago. Comedies that push boundaries and made fun of divisive social issues. With Hollywood leaving all of that behind, new blood needs to step in to fill the gap. And whilst the Daily Wire might not be avoiding the culture war that brought us to this point, at least it's not representing the other side. It's a direct response to how Hollywood pushes their message over and over again. Anything that challenges the monolithic dogma of modern Hollywood is something to be celebrated. Pushing towards freedom of expression will only be good for the film in the long run, and if the Daily Wire can find success, it'll inspire others to try their hand as well. And it's pretty doubtful that the politics of Ladyballers is the only reason behind its relative success anyway. People are simply desperate for something new that doesn't just feel like a cash grab. The massive success of innovative mid-budget movies like Godzilla Minus One, or even Hollywood's few wins of the past year, are evidence of that. Even if they're based on old properties or brands, they add something new, and eventually Hollywood will have to adapt or die.